had a lot going on and trying to get some people here that should be here in the meantime. And I'd like to say welcome to Shirley Morrow and congratulations on her new position. We are very excited because now she'll be in this committee for a while. We are going to go ahead and get started with today's order of business. Final action on HB 2842. Mr. Chair recognizes Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I make a motion that we pass out House Bill 2842 favorably.
There's a motion by Representative Carpenter and there's a second by Representative Riley. Or did you have a question? Okay. We'll go ahead and have some debate on the bill. Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. All right. Okay, committee, before I really dive into this and get started, I first want to sincerely thank the revisers and research for all of their time and efforts over the last 48 hours. We are not the only committee on their workload, and so they prepared some amendments for us with a condensed timeline. So again, I just really want to say publicly thank you to Natalie, Gordon, Jill, and Dylan over in research. With that, we're going to basically, or I'm going to try to walk us through each of these amendments as I bring them. In total, there's 4 of them, and we sat down and we addressed the concerns as best we could with the various entities and groups that the judicial branch, executive branch, that brought us some tweaks that they discussed while they were here with us. And so with that, Madam Chair, I'd like to bring an amendment regarding the judiciary.
The revisor is going to be handing that out for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and I'll ask the revisor to go over the amendment for us, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This balloon addresses some of the points brought up by the judicial.
Natalie, could you introduce yourself? I did not say.
Yes, Natalie Scott from the revisor's office.
Thank you.
This balloon addresses some of the issues that were brought up by the judicial branch in their testimony. So if you look on page 2, they expressed concern about the switch to the .gov domain. So that's being changed from January 1st of 2025 to February 1st of 2025. Currently, under the judicial branch setup, the Chief Information Security Officer reports directly to the judicial administrator, not to their CTO. So that changes on page 2, line 42. Over on page 3, the language about reviewing contracts, the CISO is required to review contracts. Right now, the bill says to ensure that there are no security vulnerabilities. We're making a change there to say that they have to review those contracts to make efforts to reduce the risk of security vulnerabilities. Over on page 5, that change is also being made, and it's being made across all the branches, so the judicial CISO, the legislative CISO, and later the executive CISO. On page 15, we're adding in the definition section, KSA 757201. This is the definition section related to information technology generally. You'll see the change there in subsection C, where we're including the judicial council as an executive branch agency, and we're excluding the elected office agencies, which is intended to address Clay Barker's concern related to the Secretary of State. Over on page 20, we're adding in the definition section from the Cybersecurity Act, specifically KSA 7572-37. We're making that same change to make it explicit that the Judicial Council is treated as an executive branch agency in this context. And then the maker of the motion did request for the Kansas Public Employees Retirement System to be stricken from the exclusions of that definition. Page 21, you'll see that same language about reviewing the contracts for the CISO. This is for the executive branch CISO, so that just matches the other CISO sections. And those are the changes in this blue.
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Natalie, for explaining this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of walk you through why the decisions were made for some of the language changes as we did them for this amendment before turning it back over to you guys. So during the conversation with the judiciary, they felt like January 1 wasn't, there's the possibility they might not hit that date. They're talking about moving over to the .gov domains, but they felt like they might just need a little bit more time. So February was agreed to, just giving them that extra month in order to make it happen. Additionally, if they're in the process and they're only a few weeks out from achieving that, then they can come before the legislature and say, hey, we're really close, we're not quite there, you know, don't do the 5% reduction or whatever. And then that would then basically be under our purview to make that decision at that time. Again, the judiciary asked that the CEDO and the CISO report directly to the judicial administrator, so we're honoring their request in that regard. After the meeting on Monday, the Judicial Council actually reached out and said that their IT services are actually already serviced by the executive branch. Their services are actually fulfilled already by OITS. And so they said, while we are the Judicial Council, and we kind of fall in the vein of the judiciary, we have our stuff over in the executive branch, and we'd like to just maintain that relationship. And so we honored their request by just saying, okay, you can stay with OITS. And so all parties agreed, and everybody was happy with that result because they're already doing it. So that's the reason why you'll see the Judicial Council listed a few times in here. I ended up striking the Kansas capers basically so that they have to also fall in line with OITS, their standards that we are now pushing for this legislation as well. And that basically is the entirety of the amendment and how we got to where we got to. I'll stand for questions, Madam Chair, and still need a second.
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll second the amendments. Is it? Okay.
Sorry, didn't you already do this with Representative Bradley, or did we not the second time yet? Oh, all right. Well, there's a motion on the table from Representative Carpenter, and there's a second from Representative Penn. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Vice Chairman, can you please go over the reasoning for the capers piece? I'm sure it's good. I just didn't understand.
So as we were going through the definitions of who all is exempted in this legislation, I found it was odd that capers had their own exemption. The Adjutant General's Department made a lot of sense to me because obviously that's DOD and they have their own stuff that they're doing. So I didn't feel like OITS was necessarily the right people to be over the Adjutant General's Department. As far as the Regents Institution or Board of Regents, like I said in my testimony, we are still working on how we need to figure out how we're going to make that work. Because of students and classified data and all that other stuff. So that's the reason why that exemption was left. There were other entities that reached out to myself asking for exemptions. I honored one of them because it made sense after they made their argument, but I told some other executive branch folks that they needed to be included just like everybody else as much as possible. So I tried not to create exemptions where I could.
Madam Chair, thank you for that. And thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I think that this is a very good set of balloon amendments, and I fully support them. And I thank you for the effort that you took in the staff for getting this created. Thank you.
Representative Riley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this question is for the Vice Chair. So reading through this before I knew about this amendment, the question came up going back to on this sheet, page 20, lines 25 through 30 or whatever, feels to me as looking at this as maybe a non-legislator person, feels like that should not be in there, should be not anybody's business of what we are allowing who to access or play, hack, something that feels like that's nobody's outside of this legislature's business of knowing who we're allowing to be part of that program or not. So it basically allows the 184th to come in and hack our system. You know, I just think we should eliminate that. And you have better insight on that than I do, but as I was reading through this, I just kind of felt like that was personal business.
Yes. Thank you. Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's actually an amendment in one of the other amendments to modify that section, actually. So we will revisit that when that amendment comes up, and I'll be sure to explain that more in depth. And hopefully the way that we rewrote it in the new amendment eases your concerns. And then we'll continue the discussion if that's okay, Representative.
Is there any more discussion on the amendment? Then I'll call for the vote. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Amendment is accepted. Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. All right, so we are going to go ahead and move into the next amendment, and I am going to assume that based on the size, it might be relating to KBI. Yes, okay.
Depends on who we talk to. That kind of makes us have an idea of how big the amendment is.
If I may explain the amendment, ma'am.
Yes, go ahead.
So in general, ladies and gentlemen, basically how this is one of the organizations that came to me and made the argument as to why. So they fall under the adjutant general, the attorney general, and their line of effort. And so in talking with them, they expressed, hey, we already we're working with the FBI. We have a lot of data that really should be retained in-house, and that the Attorney General really shouldn't be accessing because he's the prosecutor of the state of Kansas. We are kind of a law enforcement agency of the state of Kansas. There could be some issues with them accessing our data or having the ability to access data, and then that goes and spills over into court cases, and things could get hairy, and defense attorneys might, make a lot of money, potentially making arguments that these aren't separated. And so, that being said, they are still going to have to follow everything that we're outlining in here, but they get to keep their security officer, and they have to still follow the cybersecurity framework. But they already basically told me that we're already doing all this because we have to, because of all of the federal folks that we work with. So they said, this is perfectly fine for us. We just want to make sure to keep that separation. And I said, okay, that makes sense. And so that's basically how we got to this point. But yeah, so that's what the amendment is, and love to have anybody second it.
I didn't even hear the motion. Motion by Representative Carpenter, and there's a second by Representative Penn. Is there any discussion? Representative McDonald.
Just checking, they currently already have a CISO, is that correct? Okay.
That's my understanding, Madam Chair.
Is there anyone else? If not, then Representative
Very quickly, Madam Chair, thank you for the recognition. I just wanted to thank the Vice Chair for reaching out to and conferring with KBI, who were present in the room, addressing those concerns that they brought to us. This is a very good amendment, and the tethers that they already have into the federal system, I think a lot of the things that we are addressing here with this bill, they are simpatico with it. So I just wanted to assure the committee that KBI is good with this. Thank you.
Okay. Not seeing any other hands, well, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Amendment is within the bill. Representative Carpenter.
All right. So the next one that I'm going to offer is regarding the executive branch. Oh, man, I guessed wrong on that one.
Yes.
Yeah, each one's a little bit bigger. So this
you
one's
go.
just a little bit bigger.
Thank you.
So just for because of how many changes we made to this one, Madam Chair, if I could have the reviser go through it, just so that everybody is very much aware what's in this amendment before I describe it, I would appreciate that.
That would be fine. Thank you. With the reviser, once she can get out of the seat.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this balloon addresses some of the concerns brought up by the executive branch. The first one on page 1 excludes enterprise services that are offered by the Office of Information Technology Services from the merger of IT services within each branch under the CETO. On page 2, right now, the executive branch is required to consult with each cabinet agency when developing their plan for consolidation, and this would require the CETO to consult with each agency head, not just the cabinet agency heads. We're on page 3, the CISO responsibility on line 10 says to be responsible for the security of data. This is being changed to cybersecurity. It's changed in all 3 CISO duty lists to match. Same with the changes on line 12. Right now, the duty to keep a database of all the devices with inventory tags is in the CISO sections, but that is proposed to be moved to the CTO sections, so you'll see that later. And we're replacing that with a duty for the chief information security officers of each branch to work with the other branches of state government to respond to cyber incidents. The strike in lines 19 and 20. Right now, it falls under the CISO to maintain those third-party data centers in the United States or with United States companies. We're moving that to the CETO responsibilities instead of the CISO responsibilities, so that's reinserted later. In the provisions about coming into compliance with NIST standards, we're removing the language about the National Institute of Standards and Technology score and replacing it with the term CSF tier. So it'll be that cybersecurity framework tier. On page 4, you'll just see the same changes we made in the judicial CISO section present in the legislative CISO section so that those match. Same with page 5 with the scoring. And on page 8 with the scoring, changing that term to the CSF tier. And same change on page 13, 14, and 15. Page 17 is where we get to the changes for the executive branch CETO and CISOs. So those duties that we talked about moving between those 2 positions, you'll see here. And you'll also see the change that Representative Carpenter mentioned earlier in regard to Representative Riley's question about the adjutant general language. So now that will say that the CISO has to make a request to the adjutant general to permit the Kansas National Guard in a state active duty capacity to perform vulnerability assessments or other assessments. We changed the language about not shutting down that critical infrastructure. So we're requiring that during those assessments, the members performing them shall, to the extent possible, ensure that no harm is done to the systems being assessed. And then we're changing the verbiage about hacking to assessment language. And that is happening in all 3 places that exists. Again, on page 18, moving those data center requirements and the electronic tagging and cataloging. On page 19, we're seeing the same adjunct general language changes. On page 20, the same thing with the CISO responsibilities and the adjunct general language. And the same is happening on page 21. On page 23, the executive branch CISO language about requesting an audit was amended to match the other CISO language about requesting that audit from the federal agency. But the executive branch wants the ability to perform their own audits of executive branch agencies. And so that is added there as a paragraph 6. There was also brought up in their testimony that they are interested in having the executive branch agency heads be responsible for the security of data and information. So that's what's added on page 24. And then on page 25, they wanted to shorten the amount of time after a breach is discovered in which they're required to report that breach to the CISO. And I think that's the last change, yes. And I can take any questions.
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Natalie did a fantastic job. Just hitting some high points. Basically, we just shuffled some of the responsibilities around from the security officer to the chief information technology officer, as it was described. I hope that with the new language for the National Guard that addresses Representative Riley's concern, but I'll stand for questions on this because, but yeah, we had to work pretty extensively to hammer out these new changes, but yeah, I would ask for a second. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Vice Chair, thanks for your work on this.
Wait a second. Do we have a second to, I thought we already did that. Yeah. No, all right. A second by Representative Howerton. Now, Representative Schreiber, and then I'll come back to Representative Howerton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm just trying to be clear as we're moving some responsibilities around between the CEDO and CISO. Are they equivalent, or is one above the other? I'm trying to get that straight.
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in the executive branch, and actually, thank you, Representative Howerton. So if staff would like to pass this out, this is going to break it down for you for the executive branch. I made a nice little little chart, flow chart for the committee here. So this is basically how this is envisioned, and so hopefully this will help explain where this is coming from. For the executive branch, the security officer will work underneath and work with the chief information technology officer. And so, so it creates an umbrella basically across all agencies, because both the CEDO and CISO will basically set policies in their respective areas. And then the agency staff, after consolidation, will basically carry out those same policies and security functions. And what this is also doing, and one of the things that is the biggest transition with this amendment is that in the original version of the bill, we were talking about IT and cybersecurity and how we were doing both. In the negotiations, we are now just talking about cybersecurity. And there's going to be another amendment here in just a few minutes that brings in how we are going to try to tackle the IT component, because when you start looking at the NIST standards themselves, it's thousands and thousands of pages. And so the concern was that it would be very difficult for them to try to tackle the thousands of pages with the NIST standards, incorporate that, and blend it with the cybersecurity stuff that they're doing at the same time. And so we're going to start talking about ITech and their new responsibilities and how they're going to function as we move forward. But that is the reason why we've shifted to the cybersecurity portion of this, and that is really what we're going to be looking at instituting first. So we're going to bring up our security, but IT will follow along. But that was a really long-winded answer, but really the CISO is underneath the CETO in the executive branch is how this is lined out.
Okay, so, and thank you for this org chart, so to speak. It looks like the CETO and CISO both interact with the agencies. So if the agencies have a problem, who do they go to, CETO or the CISO?
Well, it would depend on the issue, but really the CETO, if they really had a big problem or something along those lines, they would go to the CETO, and then, I mean, because they work directly for the governor. And so depending on how, I mean, so that is who they would go to for IT purposes or all things, whatever. If they had security issues, then they could go to the security officer, but if it included both, they'd go to both.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Howerton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I went to Representative Carpenter this morning and said, and I drew my own little map, and he goes, close, but not quite. Let me help you with that. So I said that would be great for the committee to see, and it does help. So my question is on the National Guard section on page 17 and 20. Just, it's probably technical, but I'm trying to wrap my head where it says the executive, I can't even read with my glasses. The Executive Chief Information Technology Officer may make a request to the Adjutant General to permit the Kansas National Guard in a state active duty capacity to practice and perform vulnerability assessments or other assessments, the branch for the purpose. Does that read right on the branch? I'm not really understanding the meaning of that.
What I would do is probably after we get through these amendments, is probably make a motion to give the revisers the ability, an opportunity to make any technical amendments as they see fit, so that it would read properly in that sense.
What would be proper, just for my own clarification?
So just giving them the ability to say, for instance, to practice and perform vulnerability assessments or other assessments that the branch, or for the branch, for the purpose of the branch. I mean, so
For the purpose.
so basically just
Security for the
rewording it to
branch.
where it reads better. Yeah, so I'll make a motion to allow them to make those technical changes.
All right, are there any other questions? Representative Riley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Back to the Vice Chair. So that was exactly the piece, and I appreciate the current amendment. But it feels like from a sentence point of view that the wording in there and practice really should come out, because you have solved that problem with your amendment of your balloon in there. It reads fine without saying and practice. Practice sounds a little childish. I don't know whether that's a good way of saying that, but I think the terminology, and so I don't know whether you would like to have, a possibility amendment to your amendment, or you could just solve that through the advisor.
Representative Carpenter.
Madam Chair, for simplicity purposes, what I would recommend, and if this is acceptable to the representative, that I would be okay with that amendment. But my proposed path forward would be, let's adopt this and then allow the representative to basically make his motion, so that it just kind of keeps things cleaner.
All right, thank you. Representative Wagner.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. You referenced this quite a lot, and maybe I didn't catch it, but the switching out from the NIST score of 3.0 prior to the CSF tier, what's the import?
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the reason why is because if you look at the Cybersecurity Framework 2.0 document that was released by the federal government a few weeks ago, they don't call it a score, they call it a tier. And so that is the reason why we changed the verbiage to tier. But we also removed the NIST portion of it because that starts getting into the IT aspects of it. And so, like I said, we are shifting our focus towards the cybersecurity side right now with this legislation. And then for the IT side, we're going to have another amendment to try to address that.
For those, I think another issue that we need to clean up is, is there any place in the bill that explains what CSF stands for? Cybersecurity Framework is what it stands for, but in an English point of view, you kind of don't know if it is.
I'll refer to
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll refer to the revisor, but I believe it's spelled out in one spot and then basically abbreviated
Okay.
for everything after.
All right. Are there any other comments or questions? Representative Penn.
Madam Chair, I have some language to alleviate perhaps the concerns of Representatives Riley and concerning, but
Can we do that?
I would like to have the ability to work with the revisers on that language, if that's okay with the committee.
Well,
Representative Carpenter.
thank you, Madam Chair. So based on just the conversation, we're going to have to do a conceptual amendment now because we're out of time. We're going to have to do this.
I'll engage at that time if that's all right with you.
Yeah, we're going to have to do this pretty much today. And so we're going to have to walk through it and most likely do a conceptual amendment on that after, yeah.
Representative Hoagland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Get the glasses. On page 25, where they're reporting on line 11, not later than 12 hours instead of 48, whose idea was the 12 and where did the 48 come from originally?
48 was in the original bill, and then the executive branch asked for it to be 12. They felt that it was much better to do the reporting immediately. Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. They brought up the fact that we passed legislation last year that lowered that time frame to 12 hours. And so we're just keeping it in line with other legislation that we've passed in the past. So that 12-hour window was something we passed last year.
Okay, I'm all for it. I just didn't know where the discrepancy was. Thank you.
Representative McDonald.
Just real quick, one concern I have is that like cybersecurity framework 2.0 is what we use today, but you know, in a year or two, it might be 3.0 or 2.1. Is there a way to incorporate it in the language of this bill that it's just the latest version of, no? Okay. So each
No,
time.
we are fully aware that we're going to have to amend this bill on a regular basis. Cybersecurity changes every day. Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So according to the revisers who are also our legal counsel, basically we can't put something like that in statute that references to some other document outside of our control or purview, basically at the federal government level. We can't just, I believe it falls into the unlawful delegation of legislative authority, but I could be wrong on that. But I think that's where it's coming from. So the reason why we have it specific to the 2.0 version now is because, to the chairwoman's point, we're going to have to come back and update it periodically as time goes on because we can't just make it an automatic trigger.
If I can respond, I think that would be good practice anyway, so I'm glad to hear that answer. Thank you.
All right. Seeing no further questions or discussion, we'll go ahead and vote on the amendment. Oh, I should say, Representative Carpenter, would you like to close on your amendment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I close.
We're now voting on the amendment from the executive branch. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Representative Riley, did you have a question? Oh, you have an amendment.
Madam Chair, and I'm open for discussion, but I would like to make a motion that we would remove the letters in each one of those appropriate places that basically says and to practice and just take those three words out. Trying to, you know, they reference a couple different places in there. And so that would be my conceptual amendment.
Okay, there's a second from Representative Carpenter. Is there any kind of discussion or problem with changes? Representative Penn.
I understand that. I would replace those with the term perform and exercise because you're going to perform those duties and you're going to exercise that network. And I would also blow it out to include, and when we're talking the conceptual piece, to perform and exercise any necessary and proper assessments with current industry standards to include but not limited to penetration testing, threat assessment, vulnerability assessment, and certified ethical hacking.
Representative Riley.
I think I understand where the representative is coming from. I'm trying to keep it simple here of just taking to practice and out. So therefore, it would just permit the perform, I think it's really catching what you're saying because it's already in there, to perform vulnerability assessments or other assessments. That feels like that catches what you're saying, Representative, without adding extra verbiage in there. I just want to eliminate those 3 words. You see where the balloon is in there that says perform assessments and other, see that?
Madam Chair.
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, I see where that is. I'm of the mindset that some of these things need to be delineated so that we can hold them accountable to at least having those things. That's why I said not limited to. You can have the other assessments, but if we pull them back in here like we saw from the LPAs and these things have not been performed, I would like to be able to trust, verify, and hold people's feet to the fire to have those modicums done.
Representative Riley.
I think I would like to get some input from the vice chair since this was originally his amendment of what he sees to clarify this.
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think leaving it open the way we have it is the way we should leave it. Now, removing the 3 words does not cause any issues or problems, but I will say that the new updated language actually comes from the Adjutant General's office and their legal counsel. And so they wanted to make sure that they wrote this specifically to where they're in compliance and doing everything that they need to do. But I don't know if we necessarily need to be going to the point of having so much specificity as to, what kind of assessments and everything else. Instead, I think we should leave that up to them or the chief information officer for the executive branch, judicial branch, or legislative branch. I think the way this is written is broad enough to give them that authority, but to where they also should not harm any of the IT systems. And so I'm going to stick with removing the 3 words and trusting that, the Adjutant General and his legal counsel, the way they wrote it, I think is acceptable. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You did not propose an amendment to his amendment, did you?
Madam Chair,
It was just a
I did
suggestion.
not. We were just on discussion. I did not offer a substitute amendment, but I thank you for the conversation.
All right. Representative Howerton.
I think I agree with keeping it broad, because if we go specific with this group, we need to go specific with the other groups, and that's going to open up a can of worms we probably don't want to go down, and just allow them to do their jobs that way. And I think that works, because we want to be consistent. Whatever we do with one group, we need to do with all the groups. So.
All right. Representative Riley, would you like to close on your amendment?
Yes, that's where I was going. So, Madam Chair, I'd like to move my amendment.
Did. Sorry. There was a second by Representative Carpenter. So we'll be voting on this amendment. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Representative Carpenter.
Aren't we all having fun today? Okay, so my 4th and final amendment is concerning ITech. And what does ITech become? Originally with the bill, it was just kind of hanging out there. We were just removing it, but I think we found a more important role for them.
We did worked on a few trees on this bill. And I will ask our reviser, Natalie Scott, if she will go over this at the appropriate time.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would note Representative Carpenter did mention this briefly, but you'll see some things in this balloon that will kind of contradict or conflict with some of the amendments that you've already adopted. So we will need a little bit of leeway to work on those amendments as we're drafting the committee report. So we'd appreciate that at the end of the meeting. So the first new section, as currently drafted, would merge all information technology services under each branch, under the CTO for that branch. This amendment would just merge the cybersecurity services for each of those branches under the CTO and the CISO for each of those branches. So just the cybersecurity employees would be moving over. And so there's a strike of that provision allowing each agency that maintains confidential information to keep an employee, because they will be keeping the remainder of their normal information technology staff. It also requires the Information Technology Executive Council to be the one to develop a plan for integrating all information technology in the executive branch under the Chief Information Technology Officer of the executive branch. The judicial and legislative branches won't be making those plans to integrate all IT services under their CTOs, but their cybersecurity staff will still be integrated. The judicial branch will still have to come to you guys to report that estimated project cost for the hardware for state and county employees across the counties and getting them linked up to the CanWin network. So the Information Technology Executive Council will report that plan to you. That was already going to be happening, but instead of the Chief Information Technology Officer reporting it, it'll be the ITech reporting it before January 15th of 2026. So that's the big change on section 1. On page 6, we have some changes related to the appropriation. Because we're moving just the cybersecurity staff and not all IT staff, that will be closer to $15 million instead of $65 million. There is a note, though, to the side that I would point out that the dollar amount there, I think, may need further revision. The fiscals and legislative research, we're still trying to determine that number. So you'll adopt that today, but just note that that may need further tweaking as they try to figure that out. We also make some changes in the proviso language just to align it with the fact that we're just moving the cybersecurity services and staff and not the rest of the IT staff. And so that money is going to go now into the newly created Information Technology Security Fund that we create later in the bill. Over on page 15, we're adding a couple sections. So we'll have to go to the back of the balloon to see those. The first section that we're adding is KSA 757201. That's the definition section for the information technology statutes. You've seen this section before. That's one of the conflicts. But the changes here are that the Information Technology Executive Council is now only going to really apply to the executive branch, not the judicial and legislative branches. So we're conforming those definitions. So for example, in business risk, right now, that is set by ITech policy, and so that will continue to be set by ITech policy for the executive branch, but for the legislative and judicial branches, it will be set by the decision makers in those branches. And those changes are made throughout the definition section as necessary. And then the next section we're adding right there is the actual ITech makeup. So currently, ITech includes the legislative CTO, the judicial CTO, and 4 legislative members. Those folks will stay on as non-voting members of ITech, so they will still be able to go and contribute to the conversations, but they won't be voting members, again, because the judicial branch and the legislative branch are not going to be bound by the ITech policies anymore. We do change the chair. Right now, the chair rotates between all the CTOs, but this would make the chair just the executive branch CTO, since that's who is going, the policies are going to apply to. The council will be required to meet monthly. because one of their new tasks will be developing a plan to integrate all of the information technology services within the executive branch under the CETO. And so it was felt that they needed to meet a little bit more regularly to make that happen. So going back to where we were after we add those two. So on page 15, section 14, that's the statute that delineates the duties of the Information Technology Council, Executive Council. And as drafted, the bill would have pretty much stricken all of those duties. And so those are being reinserted, applying only to the executive branch, with the exception of the technology architecture, network type policies, because all branches do use that network. For example, we all get on the same Wi-Fi network when we're in the building. But otherwise, those policies will only apply to the executive branch. And then you'll see we're adding a duty for the council to develop a plan to integrate all information technology services for the executive branch into the Office of Information Technology Services. And then they are required to make that report like we talked about in section 1. Going. On page 18, we are removing some of the judicial and eventually the legislative CETO requirements to come into compliance with ITech standards, because again, those aren't going to apply. So those branches will have to make sure their policies and procedures are in line with the policies and frameworks adopted by the judicial and legislative branch respectively. And that is the same for page 19. That's the same language related to the legislative branch. On page 20, the legislative CETO is being charged with setting standards for the legislative division of post audit to use when they're performing their information technology audits. Those standards will be subject to the approval of the Legislative Coordinating Council. And then we are adding KSA 757209. So if you go to the very last page of the balloon, you'll see that. That is a statute that deals with reporting about projects. And right now, much of that reporting is done based on ITech policy. And so that's going to remain the same for the executive branch. But the policy is about, when to report things to the Joint Committee on Information Technology for the legislative and judicial branch will be as determined in policies set by those branches. And I think that's the last change, yes. And I can take any questions.
All right. Does anyone have any questions for the reviser? Representative Riley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do we have a motion on the table yet?
No, we do not. Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just real quick before I make the motion. So it was a lot. There's a lot there changing from how we initially set it up. But again, it was the cybersecurity versus IT portion of it. And after kind of having some extensive conversations with not only the reviser, but the executive branch, CETO, the development of what we see now with ITech and where they're at in this this amendment would be that they are now more like a steering committee. And so they basically become the group that is now going to work on how do you do consolidation? How do you do the NIST IT standards as we try to adopt? And so these are the technical experts that are going to have to wrestle with this issue. And then they're going to bring it back to the legislature and work with us, JCIT, all those individuals as they try to work this problem set for the next several years. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll make a motion to adopt this amendment.
Motion by Representative Carpenter and a second by Representative Stogstill. Is there any discussion? Representative Riley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a clarification from the Vice Chair. So, or excuse me, probably the reviser. So on page 6, this adjustment that you're making to a monetary adjustment, is that going to make an adjustment on a current appropriations, or that's omnibus? Where's that adjustment going to be seen?
Madam Chair, I am absolutely not an appropriations expert, but so this bill is making a new appropriation. So, I mean, eventually it's possible if you were to take it out of here and merge it into a different budget bill, but this bill is actually making this appropriation. And so as introduced, it would have been at 65 million, and now it's going to be closer to 15 million.
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And that's because of the initial IT personnel that we were also moving into OITS. And so that's the reason why you see a substantial drop, is because there's more IT than maybe cyber. But also, if you look, it's not going to affect this year's budget, because this is an appropriation that's set for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2026. So it's a few fiscal years out before we actually see this realized.
Representative Oropesa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a quick, can you give me an example of when you're talking about moving employees, what that looks like?
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it goes back to the diagram that I passed out to basically everybody. So right now, if you, I'm going to try to explain this as best as I can. So right now, every agency pretty much has either IT professionals, cyber professionals, what have you, embedded within their agencies. And so what we are doing with this legislation is we are basically taking those individuals that are employees, in this instance, cyber employees, and we're moving them up to this level. And so they now work for the Chief Information Security Officer. Now, the Chief Information Security Officer can then basically, even though they work for him, he can put them in agency 1, 2, 3, whatever agency, wherever they need to be embedded to do their jobs appropriately. And so, but the goal here is standardization across all agencies to where they're all following the same security standards, protocols, and the consistency, and making it to where we can really start making it to where there's a one node that it really is where we can harden that one spot, instead of having maybe 57 different groups and entities with different standards here or there. Maybe this agency doesn't have the appropriate individuals to maintain their cybersecurity currently, but this one does. And so the goal is to just make it standard across everybody, consolidate, and make it to where we are creating we're making it to where we're a lot harder target.
In a nutshell, they're not moving every single employee to a different office. They're just answering to a different boss and a different set of standards. I think that's what your original question really meant. Okay. Representative Wagner.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative, the fiscal note, or the $15 million, so is there an offsetting deduction in other departments because people will be transferred, or is that a net increase?
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So actually, it should be an offset from the other agencies, because now we're basically moving their salary over to OITS. So we should see some reductions in those other agencies. As we are looking at IT spend and with this legislation, right now, OITS, they do get some general fund money, but not much. A lot of their services fee structures come from service fees that they apply to agencies. So they actually have like a menu kind of a deal where an agency will say, hey, I would like this service. Okay, well, you're going to get charged this much. And so what we were looking at doing was, okay, what is the average fees that you have charged over the last several years? And then taking the average of those fees from, let's say, KDAD's paid $10 million a year. Well, then that $10 million would basically just be shifted over to OITS. Now, we're not doing that per se with this legislation, but we are moving the employees themselves, and so that funds and FTEs are basically being reassigned over to OITS is our goal. We don't want to leave. We don't want to. Where I'm at is I don't want to leave let's say we remove 3 people from agency 1 and we move them over to OITS, well, I think that those 3 FTEs should now go away. They shouldn't be able to keep those FTEs and then build them up somewhere else. So that's where I'm at.
All right. Revisor Natalie Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to note that this bill actually is doing that. If you look starting at line 30, the director of the budget is required to determine the 5-year average of the expenditures on cybersecurity services. And then starting in line 37, the director of accounts and reports will lapse that from the agency or transfer it from a special revenue fund. So you are handling that all in this one appropriation line.
Right. Do we have any other questions or comments? All right, then Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate all of the debate and discussion. I close.
All right, then we'll call for the vote. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? I want to say, in addition to the thanks for everyone in this room that has worked on this and thought about it, but I say special thanks to the Speaker Pro Tem for all of his work on this bill. I did a little bit of yeoman's work behind the scenes, but he did the majority of the lifting. So between the revisers and KLRD, everyone coming and all the agencies coming and spending a lot of time with us, we have a lot of thanks and a lot to be grateful for. Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, I think we need to close on House Bill 2842 at this time. Or do we need to vote with all of them together? Okay, all right. And we will move to Senate Bill 291. Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I make a motion that we remove the contents of Senate Bill 291 and create House substitute for Senate Bill 291 and place the contents of House Bill 2842 as amended into House substitute for Senate Bill 291.
And there's a second by Representative Penn. Is there any question or discussion? Representative Carpenter, did you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, due to timelines and everything else that we are currently experiencing in this building, we're down to about the last 2 weeks or so. This is an effort to allow for the discussion to continue with the Senate, and so that is the reason why we're putting it into this Senate bill, so that when hopefully we pass this through the House, we can then go to conference with the Senate and hopefully get this legislation across the line to the governor.
Representative Riley.
Just for my reference, I didn't know where that was coming from. Could you just tell us what the bill was that you just gutted?
So Senate Bill 291 was a Senate bill that was sent to House Modernization yesterday, and it was a bill from last session that dealt with I believe it was ESG. It was the Senate's version of ESG, but we passed the ESG legislation last year. So it was a Senate bill that was just kind of sitting out there on contents that we had already passed.
Are there any other questions? All right, then, Representative, would you like to close?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I close.
All right. Yes. Representative Penn seconded it. So at this time, then I'll call for the vote without any, no more discussion. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to I would like to create a motion to allow the revisers leeway to make technical amendments to clean up the language for House substitute for Senate Bill 291.
All right. Seconded by Representative Riley. You make, someone. Oh, I'm sorry. Revisor Gordon Saul.
Thank you. Gordon Self, Reviser of Statutes. I just wanted to clarify for the committee and God and country, what reviser discretion means. Back in the olden days, when I think I was the only one here then, but most amendments that were offered in committee were conceptual. There weren't balloons. And so this is a normal part of it back then. We now have 4 balloons that you adopted along with another amendment, and obviously there's overlap and merger that needs to be done. So what the reviser will be doing is simply putting all that together, as Representative Carpenter mentioned, in a non-technical way. We will not make any substantive amendments, at least not intentionally. No, we won't make substantive amendments. And if anything does come up that is a question to us as to whether that would exceed our authority, we would talk to the chair and the vice chair and the ranking minority member and the maker of the motion. And so that anything that came up that was a question on our behalf, we would consult with them before we finished, our revising.
Thank you. Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to sincerely thank the lead reviser for his service to the state of Kansas for as long as he's done it since, I'm sure it's probably since 1861, but really appreciate the lead reviser.
I echo those thanks. With that being done, we'll close this meeting and whoops, we have to vote on I'm sorry, I forgot. Okay. We need to vote on the motion for the technical amendments. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, and now we need to pass out Senate Bill 291. Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to pass out House substitute for Senate Bill 291 favorably for passage.
And there's a second by Representative Riley. Is there any question or comment? If not, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. We have Senate Bill 291. Thank you. Thank you, committee. I think our business is done probably for the rest of the session, but don't count on it. We may be back. So anyway, thank you all for being here. The meeting's adjourned.